Hello, everybody. How you doing today? I hope everybody's doing well on this Tuesday. My, I feel like time is just flying right on by. We are in our second series. We're in week 2 of that series, and we actually skipped a couple of weeks. So, yeah, time is really just marching right on. I want to thank everybody for joining me today to take, just 20 minutes with you. I think that if you are responsible for telecom, mobility, infrastructure, or governance, this session is for you. It's not theory, it's not vendor positioning, it's just structure. Of course, I represent a vendor, but I am not here to push our product. I'm here to provide thought leadership and guidance and would love it to further the conversation with you about what's going on in your organization because most mobility environments are not chaotic. They're just loosely controlled, right? And loosely controlled environments create slow bleed, cost, friction, escalations, internal scrutiny. All of that happens when you have environments that are loosely controlled. People are they're happy, but you know, at some point it all comes rolling back in like a flood or a wave. So today we're defining what real control actually looks like and what modern mobility leaders do differently to sustain it. So what I really want to start with is to talk about the fact that control is not a tool, right? Let me get you guys over to that slide, if it'll let me. There we are. Okay, so this session is entitled "From Complexity to Control: What Real Control Looks Like in Modern Mobility." That's what these sessions are all about, and we're talking today about what leaders who are effective are doing, right? And so, what I wanted to talk about in that first slide is about what control is not. Right. We talked about loosely controlled environments create chaos, right? But what control is not just having an MDM, right? And a mobile device manager is not negotiating a better rate. That's great, but it's not control. It's not running an annual audit. That's also great. It's just not control. And it's not having a spreadsheet. And for those of you who love spreadsheets, I'm sure you think that's great. I don't like spreadsheets. They are necessary evil in my book, but none of that is control. It all helps to contribute to control, but it is not control. Those are tools. So control is actually architecture, right? And if architecture is not intentional, then drift will quietly happen. And if you recall from some of my previous sessions, we talked about what drift is, and that is that slow bleed, that slow. It's kind of like I mentioned last week when that analogy of putting a toad in a pot of water that's not hot but boiling it. He doesn't realize he's boiling until it's much too late. And that's what happens with drift. You don't see it happening because it's so slow. And before you know it, you're overwhelmed and there is just zero visibility and a lack of clarity. So we want to really, we want to circumvent that by implementing control. I'll talk about what leaders are doing today to implement control and what control is. So there are 3 structural components to control. One is governance structure, right? So governance structure is defined ownership, decision rights, and escalation clarity. Those have to be in place. And then visibility. Again, we talk about when you've got that drift, you slowly lose visibility until you realize you have none and you're in the dark. So part of control is having that visibility. So inventory accuracy, life cycle transparency, and renewal intelligence. So it's not a surprise to you when the renewal comes back up because you're in front of this, you're negotiating your renewal terms, and you're happy with what you have. And then the third structural requirement for control is operational discipline. And operational discipline is usage audits, right? So knowing what you're looking like from month to month. Do you have a user that hasn't use their device in 8 months? Do you have somebody who's left the company, their device has not been used, but that line is still on the books? So usage audits are important, and they save you a ton of money, because most of the time, if an employee exits, another one enters. And so while you're giving that new employee a line, you're carrying a line, and your environment is slowly growing without your knowledge. Again, that drift is happening. Policy enforcement. So a lot of companies have policies in place, which is a must, but if they're not enforcing them, then they may as well not have them. So it's very important to have a policy in place around your mobility, and also to enforce that policy. So great leaders are doing that. And then they have a life cycle cadence. They know what that cadence is. They know what they want to do. They want to know they know how often they want to refresh. They know what budget they have in place for that. That's operational discipline, and great leaders are doing those three things. So structural control is not achieved by any single tool or initiative. It requires all three pillars operating in concert. Okay, so skipping right along, because like I said, we're going to get you out of here in 15 to 20 minutes. So we'll talk a little bit about governance structure. Governance structure, did I skip it? Governance, oh, let's talk a little bit about partial control. My apologies, and then we will skip to more about governance structure. But partial control creates partial confidence, right? So you're talking about fragmented visibility, unclear ownership, reactive renewals, and silent cost drift, all the things that I've been mentioning on the previous few slides. But I want to ask you a question. Have you ever had partial confidence in something? I'm sure you have. Like, you're slightly confident about it, but you're not 100%. You might not even be 80% or 70%. In a situation where you only have a little bit of confidence, are you willing to step up and put your neck on the line? Are you willing to put your signature on the document saying that you're confident? My guess is that you're not. And that's a lot like what partial control is like within your environment. So partial control limits leadership confidence. You're not going to want to go to your leader with answers that are incomplete, that may turn out to be incorrect. It's not a good reflection, right? So you want to have certainty. You want to make sure those decisions are strategic and they're not delayed. You want to make sure that your risk does not go unquantified, and that the organization is not paying for gaps that can be foreseen ahead of time. But I want to talk to you a little bit about governance structure. And let me just come here. My system is really acting up today. You guys bear with me. There we go. All right, governance structure. It means defined decision rights. So who has the decision to do what? So when something comes up, you're not pointing fingers or questioning who owns what, because you know who owns what. There's clear ownership between IT, finance, and security. The escalation paths are clear. You've got a documented life cycle standard, right? So again, we talked about policy. These are all things that would be part of that policy. In addition, carrier authority and clarity. That's what governance means, having those things in place in your mobility environment. If your team is debating who owns decommissioning, for example, this is an example, then you don't have control, because there should be no debate. It should be clearly defined. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, not only defined, but it should also be enforced. That's not incompetence. That's complexity. And if that complexity requires architecture, right? Because otherwise you've got chaos, which is what we'd like to avoid here, right? All right, let's get right along to the next slide. So what modern mobility leaders do differently? This is the one that I want to touch on for those of you who might be a little bit challenged in this area today, or maybe you are a modern mobility leader and you're just checking the box like, hey, yeah, I'm doing these things. One thing they do is elevate. So they've got mobility KPIs and executive dashboards, right? What are those key performing indicators? What needs to be happening on a daily or weekly or monthly basis to ensure that things are running along smoothly? So we're talking about visibility metrics alongside business KPIs. We're talking about that information being included in budget reviews. We're talking about information that can be confidently reported to leadership. The next thing that they do is tie to outcomes. So they connect uh, all of this to business performance, right? So deployment speed is a part of that. Risk posture is a part of that. And operational stability is also a part of that. The third thing they do is enforce cadence. You've got to have structure, right? You've got to have a recurring discipline. Quarterly reviews are good. Maybe monthly usage audits, or even if those are quarterly, that's probably okay. Depends on what your company's palette is. What is their, how often do they want to go along paying for devices that may not be used? So some do monthly audits, some do quarterly, but even monthly meetings with your core team to make sure that things are moving along, to discuss any issues that may be arising or questions that may be arising, things that are coming down the pike that need to be addressed. And then life cycle forecasting, which is also part of what I'm mentioning. So the difference between mobility leaders and, I hate to say, laggards, but it's on the slide here. The difference between mobility leaders and laggards is not budget. It is behavioral discipline at an executive level. Okay. So executive visibility, right? You're talking about structural disability that includes real-time inventory accuracy, IME, IMEI level visibility, very, very important. And that is at the individual phone or SIM card level. You knowing active versus inactive lines, you need that intelligence. You need to know your renewal timing, as I mentioned, and be very clear around that. And you need to track promotions, because if you are managing mobility today, you have probably experienced situations and scenarios where promotions have just fallen off, or maybe they didn't actually ever activate. So you need to be clearly tracking that. It's nice to have people in your organization that are doing it if you have the bandwidth for it and the headcount. But if you don't, you hire a company like DMI to help you with these things. So partial control equals partial confidence, and partial confidence equals something you're probably not ready to stick your neck out for or put your signature on. So let's see. Next slide here. I swear this thing is acting up today. There we go. All right. Structural certainty changes leadership posture. So all of the things we talked about having governance in place, about enforcing that governance, that gives you structural certainty because you've taken the time to design that structure. So what most organizations are today, most organizations operate in a partial control environment. Many times it's because they haven't clearly thought out or thought through what that governance should look like. It's either that, or they have a really great plan in place, but they're not enforcing it. So instead, they're reacting to complexity rather than governing it by design. So we're going to talk a lot about governing by design. I want you guys to be thinking about governing by design. And you may be doing it already, but could you be doing it better? Are there areas or challenges that you have in your environment today that could be managed or answered by having this governance by design? So, where leaders are going, right? The goal is structural clarity, which is a defined, repeatable, and executive visible framework that scales with the environment. I challenge you to have a framework in place that you're comfortable with sharing with your executive at the drop of a dime at any time, that you have this cadence in place, that you're not worried and pulling out your hair because, once a week or once a month or whatever it is, you're checking all the boxes, and with 100% certainty that what you are sharing with your leadership is accurate. So that is pretty much going to wrap up what I wanted to share with you guys today. Let me go back here to full screen real quick. So what I wanted to do is ask you a quick question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how structurally controlled is your environment today? If you're on the line, you'd like to drop that number in the chat, feel free. If you watch this on replay, you can still drop it in the chat. You can inbox me or IM me. You can get on my calendar and we can talk about it. But I can tell you that most organizations fall between 5 and 7. There's rarely a 9 and almost never a 10. And that's not horrible, right? That is just because there are some things that need to be done differently. As I mentioned, modern mobility leaders are elevating mobility. They're tying it to business outcomes. They're enforcing cadence, right? In the last 24 hours, I'm sorry, 24 months. In the last 24 months, we've helped organizations recover over $36 million in mobility spend. But more importantly, we've helped them recover structural control. So cost savings are a symptom. Control is the cause. And that's what we've been talking about here today. That control is the cause. So partial control compounds risk. Partial control compounds scrutiny. You don't want that from your leader. Partial control compounds cost. Control is about structural certainty. It's kind of a tongue twister for me there. So if you're serious about moving from partial control to structural control, I am offering a limited number of 15-minute device clarity brief sessions. I really like to call them clarity brief sessions. Well, we'll just talk about what type of clarity do you have into your environment today. It's not a pitch, it's not a slide deck, it's just structural validation. And then maybe we can move that number on the scale from a 4 or 5 or 6 to an 8 and maybe even a 9. Let's make sure that control is real in your environment. I want to real quick just share with you well, actually, I don't have the QR code here today, but you can certainly get on my calendar. My link is in my LinkedIn bio. You can drop a comment and letting me know that you'd like to reach out, and I will certainly reach out to you. You can inbox me on LinkedIn, and I will certainly reach out to you. I'm excited about the opportunity to talk to you. Let's do this 15-minute clarity brief session. I think it's important. It's definitely well worth 15, 20, even 30 minutes of your time because it's going to save you so much time in the future. So for now, I really appreciate you guys joining me for another episode of Coffee Time. As I always say, enjoy the rest of your day. Sips up, and I will see you next week here on Coffee Time. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining me.